Hi, this is Zibby Owens, and you're listening to Totally Booked with Zibby, formerly Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. In my daily show, I interview today's latest best-selling, buzziest, or underrated authors and story creators whose work I think is worth your time. As a bookstore owner, publisher, author, and obviously podcaster, I get a comprehensive look at everything that's coming out and spend my time curating the best books so you don't have to. Stay in the know, get insider insights, and connect with guests like I do every single day. For more information, go to zibbymedia.com and follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens. Elizabeth Harris is the author of How to Sleep at Night, a novel. Liz Harris is an award-winning reporter at the New York Times, where she covers books and the publishing industry. How to Sleep at Night is her first novel. She lives in New York City with her wife and kids. Welcome, Liz. Thanks so much for coming on to talk about How to Sleep at Night, your first novel. Congratulations.
Yay! Thank you so much for having me. Sorry, I'm a little excited.
You should be excited. The book is great, and there's so much to discuss in the book and in the content, and it's timely and yet universal with all the motherhood stuff and parenting and then politics and lost loves. And I mean, there's just so much. Okay, go back and tell listeners what your book is about, please.
Sure. So the book is about marriage and ambition and what happens when who you are in the world doesn't match how you see yourself. So there's a woman living in suburban New Jersey who's become a stay-at-home mom by accident, and it's a terrible fit for her. And she feels like an accessory in her husband's life and desperate to feel like what she wants actually matters. She reconnects with an old girlfriend who is a woman who is a big shot political reporter at a big national newspaper. And her career is her entire life, but it's become a job that she sort of dreads and resents. And there's this saying that people who love the uniform more than playing the game, and she's afraid she's become like that. And then meanwhile, a few towns over, we meet these two men who are married. One is a Democrat, one is a Republican. And then as the book begins, the Republican decides to run for office.
Amazing. Well, it's funny when you said your self-image doesn't match. You should read this book, not to recommend another book while I'm talking to you about your book, but there's a book called Chasing Peace by Tom Rochert. It's nonfiction, and it's basically that entire concept explored. Ooh. So you two might have a really interesting conversation, kind of out of the book.
I would love to. I will totally read that. I find that idea just so fascinating, especially because sort of as you reach different phases in your life, I feel like it's something everyone experiences, right? Like when you graduate from college for the first, you're sort of out in the world as an adult in whatever way for the first time, your self-image probably doesn't really match kind of what you're doing and, right. Your day to day. Like if you get divorced, when you have kids, there are all of these, when you retire or just, middle age, whatever, there are all of these times when, you just feel really lost and like you've sort of lost the thread of your own story, and sort of nothing makes people crazier than that.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yes. The hunt for some sort of acceptance can be your demise, to be honest, bit hard to achieve. Okay. So I love Ethan's relationship with Gabe and how really all the relationships, but you include all the day-to-day stuff that like anyone in a relationship can experience. However, because of the political ambitions, there's this whole overlay. And what do you do when like you want to support someone, but you don't support what they want, but you support them? Like, what do you put first? Do you sort of push down your own feelings or not? I don't know, so complicated. And then Ethan also has this past that comes up to sort of haunt him, but with his drinking problems and all of that. So maybe talk a little bit about that and both addiction or, substance stuff, also with, how to know how to prioritize without losing yourself in your relationship.
Totally. I mean, I think that's, I feel like that's such a day-to-day problem, right? And this is sort of just a problem and, something we all navigate in marriage, but like on steroids, right? And, trying to figure out kind of where you fit in your relationship and sort of how do you support the, hopefully you want all the same things and that would be lovely, but, life is complicated, right? And so these two people have, Gabe and Ethan have this like really a very solid, good marriage. They really take good care of each other in a sort of, everyday, day-to-day way. Like they're a really great team and a really great partnership. But then, and when they first get together, they're not that far apart on politics. I don't agree, but it's not that extreme. And then over the years, which does happen with some people, they sort of drift further and further away until they sort of wake up, they've woken up one day and there's almost no overlap between them anymore. And I think that's something a lot of people deal with. But then, one of them decides to run for office. And so that becomes their sort of this thing, the hardest part of their relationship, and the thing they disagree on becomes like the center of their lives and the thing that, they both become kind of famous for, basically. And like, what would you do if suddenly you're known for these beliefs you find like kind of abhorrent, right? So yeah, I mean, I thought that was actually sort of where it started, the idea of thinking about people who disagree and then thinking like one day, God, it would be really terrible if one of them ran for office. It would be really terrible if one of them ran for office. That would be interesting, right? And then from there, thinking about other ways that we lose ourselves. But, I mean, I think that was really important to the book. Also, it's not like a book about campaigning or a book about politics. It's a book about marriage. And so showing their day-to-day and sort of how they take care of each other and all the, craziness and difficulty that comes with parenting a small child and trying to have two jobs and trying to do all the things, like that was really important. And also, is like, as you said, is something we all, not everyone, but a lot of people go through, and is also just something I find really interesting, just like how just strange this phase of life is, right? Of like trying to have a career and a marriage and small children all at once. Like so many people do it, but it's a lot.
Yes.
It's a lot. And so I thought that, that's obviously like a really rich area to explore. And then another thing of just sort of like, kids are so like, I have two. They're absolutely wonderful and they're ridiculous also. Like children are so strange and so weird, like it's like, and I thought that was, a kind of another thing to sort of bring into it as well, is like, that's a big, obviously a big part of your marriage is sort of navigating these strange little beings. They're wandering around your house demanding snacks. So, that was part of it also. So yeah, so it was trying to sort of balance, like the focus of the book is on that stuff, is on that day-to-day stuff and how they interact. And there's this sort of politics sort of in the background. And again, like it's not about, how someone chooses to run their campaign or anything like that. It's about what this decision does to his marriage. So
Exactly.
there's that. And on the, addiction front, I mean, I would say, yeah, you're the first person to ask me about that. This is a
Ooh.
good question. I think that too is really universal, unfortunately. Like so many people either deal with it or have it in their families. And, it's something that is also complicated because there's still a lot of judgment around it, even though we have so many people have personal experiences with it.
Mhm.
But when you're on a public stage, it becomes something very different.
Mhm.
And it's kind of one of the ways that, like, when people become sort of, politics or not, like when people become public figures, like the way they're judged is different, right?
Mhm.
And they become not real people anymore. They become just sort of a target for, where you can stick things you like or stick things you don't. And it becomes very easy just to forget that they are also human. And, that was sort of one way of looking at that, of sort of the idea that like somebody in your family or a friend might have a history of addiction and you look at it one way, and then some public figure does, they have either that or they have some other, thing that they've dealt with. And, we have a tendency to judge people much more harshly or to not judge them at all, right? But like whatever it is, there's not that sort of like nuance that we give to actual people we actually know in our real lives.
Yeah.
And that's also a piece of the book where people kind of forget at one point that,
Mhm.
like the people that Gabe knows at his work, his teacher, the people he works with just sort of forget that Ethan is real,
Mhm.
basically,
Yeah.
right? And they
Yeah.
just are thinking of him as, oh, that jerk who's running for office, right? And it's like, well, he's actually also his husband, right?
Right.
He's a person. So I thought that was sort of, an interesting, which wasn't something I set out to do, but it just sort of happened.
Oh, I like that moment at the copier, sort of towards the end, and he's like, "No, actually, he is still my husband,
Right.
And
Right.
like, could you stop now? Like, we are still married. We are going to continue to be married. So please stop. Yeah.
Yeah. We all have those lovely people we work with, Like,
And you don't have to answer this, but was there someone in your own life who struggled with something similar that informed the narrative in this storyline?
not exactly. I mean, like, without getting into anyone's like personal things, I would say like broadly yes, but
Hmm.
nothing, but not it was not specific to this. It was sort of
Hmm.
like I am broadly familiar with sort of how addiction
Yeah.
plays out in like various, with various people I've known,
Yeah.
but I was not like, nothing from this book is, there's a lot of like debut novelists who I have a friend who has written one novel, and she was saying that she then tried to write another one and she hated it because the first one was not actually a novel, it was a memoir. But that is not this. Like, there is nobody in this book that is just like straight up pulled, and the addiction
Mhm.
is not straight up pulled. So it's, bits and pieces are pulled from stuff I've seen, of course, but it's not kind of a wholesale lifting of anyone's experience.
Okay. And you also have, I know you have been at the New York Times forever. There is also another storyline in the book which questions ethics of what happens at papers, what you have a right to do, the tension between your own allegiances and your work responsibilities and that delicate dance as well. Speak a little bit about that.
Sure. Let's see. So yeah, I've been at the New York Times for, oh God, 19 years. I've been a reporter there for 15 years. It's been a very long time. And like I am a true believer in all of the stuff, right? All of these ethics policies that I think are interesting, especially now. This is not quite what happens in the book, but just as a little bit of a tangent. Like, we're not allowed to discuss our personal politics. Like, I can talk about what's happening in the book, but I can't tell you what I think
Hmm.
because I'm not allowed to attend protests. I'm not allowed to sign petitions. Like, none of that, because the idea is that like if I say what I think one way or another about some hot button issue, it makes it a lot harder for the people who are covering it, because then people can kind of go out and be like, well, this reporter thinks this.
Mm.
No, I cover books. I don't cover said hot button issue, whatever it is.
Mhm.
It's, people see the institution as a mass, right? And not as individuals kind of doing separate things. And so it's harmful for the institution. So anyway, that was a tangent, but I just find it interesting because in the
Yeah, it is
publicity side
interesting.
of
It's related.
right? Thank
Yeah,
you. Thank you. Very
yeah,
valid.
no problem.
So in the book, it's more sort of straightforward, like trying not to give anything away, but it is more about kind of what like her personal allegiance is essentially to her brother
Mhm.
versus her allegiance, sort of her belief in these ethics and sort of what happens there.
Mhm.
And yeah, I don't know how to say anything else without
Okay,
giving
yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
it away.
Well, I just liked that knowing that that came from years of experience and that there was this extra layer of truth and people wonder, what is it like to work at a newspaper and, what is, and this is one of the areas where there can be some big pitfalls or conflicts. And I found that really interesting because you don't
Yeah.
necessarily think about it. So,
It's very tricky for people who have like I'm lucky enough that I have never had to deal with this, but
mhm.
it's very tricky for people who sort of who cover something specific, and then if a family member kind of enters that world in any
Mhm.
kind of big way, like that can be a real problem. Often people have to change their beats, like that kind of thing.
Mhm.
But I've lost my train of thought. So go
That's
ahead.
okay.
What's your
Okay,
next
great. My next question.
question?
No, I loved also that there are multiple sets of LGBTQ relationships in the book, right? We have a gay couple, like past relationships for women and whatever. So tell me about writing that because there are obviously many books in which there is one character, one couple, and then another. I don't know. Like just talk about that and writing.
Totally. Absolutely. So I'm gay, so that's where I come from. And it just sort of never occurred to me to do it differently, I
Hmm.
think, is
Hmm.
the thing. Like, I kind of started with these four characters in my head, and they just sort of popped out that way. I mean, I feel like it's, there are a lot of books about gay people at this point, but it's still like relatively a really small number,
Yes.
like it's really like it's not a lot. And like our stories just aren't really out there in the same way. Obviously, there's a smaller number of
Yeah.
us, all of that. And for years and centuries, like, our stories weren't told at all.
Hmm.
So, I don't like it wasn't something I viewed as some responsibility. It was just sort of like I was like, well, this is who these people are, and this is sort of this is how I see the world, and it's something I think about a lot. And the
Hmm.
experience the sort of experience of being gay right now is really interesting too. I mean, I'm 41, and the degree to which it's changed just in my lifetime is
Mm-hmm.
insane. Like when I was in high school, if someone told me I would have been able to get married, I would have laughed at them. I was like, no way, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then things changed so quickly that I got married at 28. But also, when I got married, it still wasn't legal in New York. Like that wasn't very
Yep.
long ago, right? And so there's still, it's also new, and the experience of being a gay parent, I think, is
Mm-hmm.
also something that hasn't been written about a lot.
Yep.
And it's something I felt very like lucky to be in a position to do, right? And just sort
Yep.
of kind of just show people a little bit about what these people's lives are like, and that kind of thing. But no, I mean, it was great. And I feel like I've always wanted to write novels, and I always wanted to write about, like, I've always thought of characters whenever I've come up with them. A lot of them are gay,
Mm-hmm.
and it's nice. It's lucky that it's at a point where it's not like, okay, so this is a gay book that goes in the gay
Right.
section for the gay
Yep.
people, right? Like that's no longer where we are, and that was also not long ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's wonderful that, like, it's just considered a book, which
Yeah,
is which is
totally.
so. And I remember the other thing I was going to say before
Oh,
when I
great.
lost my train of
Bring it
thought.
in. Yes.
Is I will say one thing that sort of, yeah, I don't know if maybe may or may not be interesting, but because I was talking about how, we're talking about my experience of
Mm-hmm.
journalism right after I had said that nothing is based on anyone that I
Yeah.
know, right?
Yeah. Right.
And these things are both true. And the reason is that I wrote this book while working full time with two small children, and
Oh.
started it during COVID, and it almost killed me. But it was also wonderful. But a lot of the decisions I made, any decision I could make that means I didn't have to do research. So I was like, someone is a workaholic. Okay, they have to have my profession, because I know a lot about my profession and I don't have time to look into anybody else's profession. So it would have either been mine, or my wife's a doctor. So they would have either been a journalist or a doctor, and a doctor didn't work quite the same way because it's a private function rather than a public function. So yeah, so that was sort of that. And it's fun and I'm writing another book now, and it does require some research, and I'm on book leave for a couple months, and it's allowing me time to do said research. And that's very fun. But I did not do much of that. I did some research for the first book, but anything that I didn't have to, I was like, okay, decision made for that. Fine. So
Yes, they will live on my block. They will like the food I like. They will go to my kids' schools with a nickname. Yeah.
So I spent, like, so a lot of it is it's in both Manhattan and New Jersey. And one of the best compliments I've gotten is somebody was like, "Where in New Jersey do you live?" And I was like, "Yes, I do." Like, I did it. All right. I did research that. I spent a lot of time in New Jersey though. So
Oh, yeah. And now you can write it off.
hey.
By the way, how did you come up with the title, and what were some other titles you were considering, if there were any?
My wife came up with it, which was great. We were driving around. We were visiting my in-laws, and we live in Kentucky, and we were driving around, and there was a title on it, which I'm not going to say because I've grown to hate it.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't that bad, but I love the new title and the old title. I'm like, I don't like it so much.
Mhm.
And I was saying, like, I want a new title, like, and I had her, she's read it God knows how many times. She's a very nice woman. And after that, I think that was maybe the third time she'd read it or something, or I forget, a second or third. And when she read it, I was like, the thing I want you to read for is the title. Like, this is what we need. Go team. And we were driving around, and we were sort of talking about sort of things like guilt, and sort of how far, sort of what we were talking about before with Ethan and Gabe, like, kind of how far can you go to support somebody
Yep.
when you don't believe what they're doing, but you love them and you believe in them. And then, kind of similarly with some of the other plot lines, how far can you go for yourself?
Yep.
And what do you do for yourself, even if it's not in the best interest of, say, the person to whom you are married, right? And, how do we kind of make these, how do we make these decisions, and how do you live with them, right? And so that was sort of the idea, and she came up with, I forget exactly what the original version was, but it was basically this. And I was like, we got it, we're done. So that was thank you to my wife.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Well, the fact that you are one of the people at the Times who covers the publishing industry, the fact that you've decided to even release a book is a vote of confidence in the industry at large. So that's good. Knowing all that you do, and I was looking at some of your old articles. By the way, Muckrack says you've published like 1,275 articles. I don't know if that sounds about right, but wow, that's so many New York Times articles. What inside information, so to speak, having analyzed and studied the industry, are you bringing to bear as you bring this book out and deciding even how to publish, where to publish, how to promote, all of that stuff?
I mean, yes, I would say kind of knowing to your first point about the vote of confidence, like true, definitely. Like people in this country buy books. Yay, keep doing it, please. But it is true that a lot of people buy the same books,
Mm-hmm.
and there are certain titles that sort of float to the top and make buckets of money, and for everyone else, it's really hard to break through. So I will admit that I am slightly terrified. But and I knew all of this going in about how hard it was, but I wrote the book because I wanted to write it. I wanted to write a book, and I felt like, as weird as it is, it sounds ridiculous that like my kids were, they were tiny. They were, oh God, 2 and 5 or something, 3 and 5 when I started. They were really little. And it was like a year into COVID. But at that point, I still didn't have commute, and my kids were back in school, and my wife is a doctor, so she's always gone to work. And I sort of looked around one day and I was like, oh, I'm by myself and I'm not expected to go to the office. And I have an hour and a half when I would normally be on the train. So like, let's see, right? Let's see what happens. And that was kind of how it started. And I just wanted to try writing it. And then it just kind of, it worked. But when I was writing it, I was like, well, just playing the odds, probably no publisher is going to buy this. Oh, they bought it. Oh, wow. Okay. Like that was unexpected. How nice. So I think it's a little nervous making, but also, the process has also been really fun, I have to say. And like the team I'm working with is wonderful. And I guess in terms of deciding kind of how it informs like decisions I would make, I would say one thing is, I think you are certainly very aware that the age when you sort of like wrote the book, gave it to your publisher, and maybe sat for a few interviews, like that is done, right? You have to like hustle. You really have to hustle. And so I'm trying to do that, and I'm trying to like be a good teammate for my publisher and my publicist, and I'm trying to do anything I can. I'm gonna if any book club that invites me, I will happily join your Zoom. FYI, book clubs, if you want to invite me, I will happily show up. Things like that, right? And like I talked to an author who did that, and she was and her book did very well, and she was like, it was one of many things. Who knows? But I enjoyed it. So, and if you're going to enjoy it, you might as well. And, that's a good way to put in the legwork, right? Like there are some people who are like going to do great on TikTok or whatever. I am not one of those people. No, but I'm happy to come to a book club and talk to people who like to read. So like those are the decisions I'm trying to make, is to like, there are so many different things you can do to promote your book, and you should do as many of them as you're going to enjoy. And so that's sort of the approach I'm trying to take.
Well, I love that you're getting this vantage point, and it's going to inform all of the things you do. And I can't wait to hear about your experience and hopefully then read something you write about it.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's definitely given me a lot more insight into the industry, because I know it pretty well. I've been covering it for 4.5 years, I guess, but I only know it from the outside, and it is different, and you try and talk to people all day, every day who work in the industry in various capacities, but it's not, it's not the same. Like the emotional appreciation is different now. So I think that's definitely valuable.
Amazing. Well, congratulations, Liz. Really great book. You're a great writer. I mean, you're a great journalist, but it doesn't always translate. But the dialogue and the scenes and just how the pacing, just like all the things you look for in the book, like you did a really good job. So I really liked it. Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Okay. Good luck.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye, Liz.
Thank you for listening to Totally Booked with Zibby, formerly Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. If you loved the show, tell a friend, leave a review, follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens, and spread the word. Thanks so much. Oh, and buy the books.